Standard 3 is about assessment and measurement, or how we grade our students and monitor their progress through the course. And as I was talking about in Standard 2, alignment is one of the important principles of quality matters. So the notion is that every learning outcome should be assessed in some way. For that to happen, the learning outcomes have to be measurable. In addition, you shouldn't have a bunch of assessments that don't tie back to learning outcomes. Along the same lines, you want to include varied assessments that are appropriate for the measurement of the stated learning outcomes. So use a variety of assessment tools, including quizzes, Dropbox items, discussion groups, and some other ones that are appropriate for your field of expertise. So, for example, in programming courses, I have my students write a lot of code, and I assess their code and I give them feedback on their code. And this helps me monitor their progress towards achieving the learning outcomes that are in line with my stated learning outcomes. By appropriate, what we really mean is that if the level of intellectual behavior in the learning outcome is at one level, then the assessment should be on a similar level. So for example, if I'm asking the student to write a paper, that's testing their ability to analyze and to create. If I'm asking them to answer a multiple choice question, that's asking them to demonstrate their knowledge, which is at a lower level of intellectual behavior. So if the stated learning outcome is saying that the student will be able to analyze a situation, but all of my assessments are on the level of demonstrating knowledge rather than on analysis, then my assessments are not appropriate for measuring the stated learning outcomes. So in addition to selecting assessments that are in line with the learning outcomes, it's also important to clearly state how the student will be assessed. So one of the things that your students are going to be concerned with is, when I turn this assignment in, how is the teacher going to grade it? And there are a couple of ways of communicating to the student clearly what your standards are in assessing their work. One of the ones that I think is particularly handy is to create rubrics that describe in detail how the work will be assessed. So for example, in my software design course, I have a number of different rubrics that cover, for example, my lab grading rubric. Here are all the standards that I'm going to use to judge their course. And you'll see a different styles of rubrics. Some rubrics have point scales at different levels of achievement, and some rubrics have different categories of achievement with different characteristics. For this particular rubric, what I'm looking at is several different requirements that I check when I grade their lab, along with basic standards for what I consider good work on that and versus something that needs improvement. And the way I tie this to grading is that students start with full credit on the assignment, and then I generally deduct 1 or 2 points for each item that needs improvement. So exactly how you grade your assessments is up to you as the instructor and the instructional designer. But communicating to your students clearly how you will assess their work, that's something that's important for meeting standard 3. Other instructors just put some detail in the syllabus about how their students' work will be evaluated. So for example, in my syllabus, I have under grading and assessment, I include a breakdown of the different types of assessments that I use in my course. I have some policies on turning in assignments. And I have detailed information on how they're going to be graded. So what percentage of their score is going to be based on labs, discussions, and exams out of a total. I list the assignments that I have in my course along with total number of points, if there are bonus points available, assignment type, total percentage of the grade, and so on. Clear details on my lab submission policy and my late policy for labs. Basically, I try to provide as much detail and transparency as I can for the student so that when they get their grade on the assignment and when they get their grade at the end of the term, they understand why I've made that assessment. So provide multiple opportunities for students to measure their own learning progress. This is going to be useful both for the student and also for yourself. So there are two reasons to use assessments, summative assessments and formative assessments. So a summative assessment is an assessment that you do sort of after the fact in order to evaluate how much the student has learned. And generally, your final grade in a class is going to be a summative assessment. A formative assessment is an assessment that you can use basically as a diagnostic to figure out how well the student is mastering the learning outcomes along the way. So you can have an assessment early on in your course that tests the basic knowledge that the student should have mastered at a particular point before you build on that knowledge and ask the student to do more advanced work.